Thanks for tuning in again. Today I want to talk a little theory at you. In point, I want to talk about cutting up the whole note, subdivisions as we call them. But first, let's set a few facts straight. Drummers do have more trouble grasping note values than I think stringed or horn players do, because we don't have controllable sustain on our instrument. So when we hit a pad or a snare drum or anything else, the impact is all we hear. There is no controllable sustain. We can't make a snare drum beat sustain for a whole note. So all the note values mean to drummers effectively in the first place is position. It tells you where the start of the note is, but beyond that it's relatively meaningless. So when you say to a drummer, I want you to play for a whole note, he's gone like, okay. And now you say to the drummer, I want you to play for a 16th note, and he goes, yeah, I don't see the difference. Yeah, and at first value I understand that, right? Because the only part of the drum kit that has controllable sustain is the open hi-hat, which of course I've covered in another movie. So you have to understand that, drummers out there, that when anyone else thinks about note values, they think about note duration, how long the note goes for, right? So look, let's nominate a tempo, because without a tempo all of this is relatively meaningless. I'm going to nominate a tempo of 60 beats per minute, which obviously would be one strike every second. But I'm going to nominate that tempo as quarter note tempo. In other words, the tempo that the quarter notes would flow at. And the reason I do this is because the common time bar, the 4/4 bar that most musicians will be learning from when they begin their studies, has a whole note worth of music in it. Think of it like this. What if I had a whole pizza? Yeah, I would have a big circle of pizza, and if I wanted to cut that up to serve to my friends, I'd have to consider first of all how many friends I was cutting it up for. If there's only two of us, I could cut it down the middle and I could have two halves. Yeah? If there were three of us, I'd need to be a little bit more creative with the geometry, but that's doable. Four of us is easy. That's just a half and a half again to create quarters. And you think, well, yeah, so what's this got to do with music? Everything. Because that fractional understanding of how to cut a pizza up is exactly the same fractional understanding of how to cut a whole note up. Yeah. So as I said, sustain is something I'll back in and out of as I give this presentation. But understand, drummers, that we're really got to imagine the sustain, because our instrument doesn't give it to us. I'll show you what I mean. 60 beats per minute, 60 quarter note beats per minute. How many quarter notes would there be in a whole note? How many quarters of a pizza would there be in a whole pizza? Oh, 4. Yeah, duh. You see where I'm coming from? Pizzas, notes, who gives a damn? It's just fractional maths, right? Quarters are quarters. Now, I'm going to use this terminology of the mathematical note names throughout this presentation, but you need to be aware that all these notes have traditional names as well. The whole note, for example, has a traditional name that's a semi-breve. The half note is a minim. The quarter note is a crotchet. And you need to be aware of these traditional names, because a lot of musicians still use them, right? But drummers tend to go to the more mathematical side of things because it makes more sense to us about cutting these subdivisions up. So, 60 beats per minute sounds like this. And I'm going to play a whole note for you. Now a whole note is 4 quarter notes. They're quarter notes, so I have to go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and here I am playing whole notes on the practice pad at 60 beats per minute, 60 quarter note beats per minute, right? It's still like, well, it's the position, isn't it? Like for me, it's like where the 1 is, right there, because I've got 2, 3 and 4. It kind of like rests for me more than note value. You see my point? There's where the confusion lies. Now, if I was playing a stringed instrument like violin, I could go la, 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 And all of a sudden, note values start to make more sense. Oh right, gee, that's a hell of a long note, isn't it? Yes, it is. It goes for the whole bar. It's a whole note. A whole note is equal to a whole bar, or a whole pizza, if you like. Now, hang with me, because we're over the hump, okay? So if I've got a whole note, I can fill up a whole 4/4 bar with it. Cool. If I cut the whole note in two, obviously I can get 2 half notes to fit in the common time 4/4 bar. Yes? And again, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Now I'm playing half notes on the practice pad, and you can see what I mean. Like, they don't sound any different to the quarter notes I played on the practice pad, because it's really just about where the notes start and finish. Yeah. Again, the violin player would be da 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 da. Okay. Not too hard, right? Cut the whole note into 3. This gets a little tricky. We get something called a half note triplet. In fact, if you cut kind of anything into 3, you'll get something called a triplet. That's something you'll encounter more and more as you go through the different subdivisions. And a triplet is kind of fitting in 3 beats in the space where traditionally you might want to only put 2. So that can create polyrhythmic problems. With this particular subdivision here, the half note triplet, it's a polyrhythm because it strikes 3 times exactly in the same space as that metronome strikes 4 times. And it's like, Yes, it's quite a tricky subdivision, and not one that beginners normally bother with. That's one for more intermediate or advanced study. Okay, but for those that are interested, how to get to a half note triplet is to come from an 8th note triplet back through a quarter note triplet to a half note triplet. And by that I mean, as you'll see later, an 8th note triplet counts 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet. Now if I go half that speed, I now have a polyrhythmic triplet, which is 6 against 4. And if I go half that speed, la la la. Yes, I have a half note triplet. So like I said, not for beginners. Down here though, we have the bread and butter. This is what we came for. This is the quarter note subdivision. This is where the metronome is. I'm going to play some quarter notes on the pad for you. If I were a violinist, la 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 la. Oh, okay. So with the exception of the half note triplet, so far so good. Whole notes, half notes, quarter notes. What else? Well, we can cut this whole note up into any subdivision we want. We've gone 1, 2, 3, 4. We could cut it up into 5. We could cut it up into 7. But it's not traditionally done that way. If you use the subdivisions of 5 and 7, you're not normally subdividing a whole note. You're normally subdividing a smaller note, like even a quarter note. And we'll talk about that in another movie as well. So before I digress, let's just say 5 and 7 have been omitted from this presentation because they're very uncommon in this context. So, from 4 we're going to go to 6. Now 6 is the quarter note triplet I was just playing, again polymetric 3 against 2. La 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 la. From 6 we'll go to 8. Now 8 is also majorly important for the beginner musician because it's 8th notes. or quavers in the other terminology. And we're now going to start cutting up this quarter note into smaller bits. In fact, I'm going to cut each quarter note into two. It's like you've got a quarter of the pizza and all of a sudden you decided you've got to share all those quarters, so they're all going to get cut in two. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, we've got 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. But if we create that in the context of those beats being the downbeats of 1, 2, 3 and 4, then we start to change our count, use the word and to cover the upbeats. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and la 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 la. Eighth notes, bread and butter. Underneath eighth notes we'll go up to twelfths, eighth note triplets, however you want to look at it. The point is that there is a lot of music based on this subdivision of time. There's our time. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a la 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 la. Okay. And from the 12th notes or 8th note triplets we go up to the 16th notes, and again, whilst not necessarily something for the absolute beginner, certainly the intermediate player will be working in the 16th subdivision all the time, and so that one is where the quarter note gets cut in 4. La 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 la. We have other ways of counting this. We go 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1. Yep. So there's a different ways you can voice the subdivision in your head, different ways you can count it, different ways you can sing it, and that's all important too. So for today's lesson, we've considered cutting the whole note, which is equal in length to a whole bar of 4/4. We've cut it by 2, we've cut it by 3, we've cut it by 4, we've cut it by 6, we've cut it by 8, we've cut it by 12, and we've cut it by 16. And they're the common subdivisions of the whole note. And you need to familiarise yourself with them. What the notes look like when they're all drawn differently, so we can differentiate one from the other. And this graphic thingy here I have as a PDF, and I'll make that downloadable at the end of the movie. I can't link it directly within the movie, but I'll put the link in the movie for posterity, and I'll put a hot link in the description that you can just click on and it'll take you straight to the download. Okay, whew, hope that wasn't too long-winded for you, but that is Theory 101, subdivisions of the common time bar / whole note. Cheers.